they're arguing that children should be required to go to public education or not be supported in the other decisions. So this is, like I said, it pretty much ended the debate when the guy on the other side shared this story and asked one question. He said, I was in, this was again, memory that you may be aware from history. He says, I was in Berlin, and I was visiting the Berlin Wall, and I saw that the Russians and the East Germans built a wall to keep people in, and people were trying to get across the wall and being willing to cross the wall and die if they had to get across. So I asked myself this question: how bad must the system be that you have to wall people in and they're willing to die to get outside of it? How bad must the system be you have to build a wall? So my question for you today is, how bad must the educational system be that you have to force people to stay in, like the Berlin Wall? That ended the debate pretty much. That's a drop mic moment in debate. If you can come up with a story, an analogy like that, which you cannot answer. And that's what you want to do. In cross-ex, you want to lead them to making a statement from which they cannot recover. Okay? And you want to do it subtly. If you do too direct, a good debater will say, here's where they're leading me, and they'll begin to obfuscate. I mean, they'll quit answering your questions. So several things you want to do. If you can develop in advance this progression, where do you want to end up? Now, how did I get there in my own thinking? Which questions that I asked, I had to answer in a certain way, and then you sort of ask those questions. You do not want to answer ever, not ever, but pretty much never do you want to ask open-ended questions in cross-ex, because that allows your opponent to just talk their stuff again. You want to ask them yes or no, agree or disagree questions as much as possible. And on the reverse side, when you're being asked questions, if they ask you an open-ended question, just repeat your whole case. I mean, you got to answer. You want to be honest. Answer the question. Answer it as long as you can, getting your points across again. If they ask you an open-ended question, in which people are always asking open-ended questions, they have the right to stop you. And if somebody is beginning to talk, you need to stop them. It is your time. So that's what you want to be aware of in cross-ex. This is the one time you actually get to talk to the other person and make them answer questions. Sometimes you're going to get them and then you're going to answer the question later because you may save it for your rebuttal time, but that's part of the art. But I developed, which I'll hand to you soon. We'll see how you think these work. I did one for human dignity and one for justice, and those seem to be. And after say last week, I haven't thought much about this week. I thought it for these 2 weeks. The other on Tuesday of this week, I just sat down and just started thinking. So I wrote all these 5 pages that I'm giving you. I wrote on Tuesday. They're not edited or anything like that. So if you find problems or they don't make sense, blame it on not editing. Okay, so here I'm going to ask the question: who wants to be my guinea pig? Who wants to be defending justice for the? Let's see. This is affirmative cross and rebuttal for the negative value. So who wants to be the negative? And you're talking about justice, which I guess 4 or 5 people did in the debate. You're the negative, and you argued for justice as your value. And I'm going to get ready to cross-ex you. Who wants to be cross-exed? Todd doesn't, because he's done this so many times. And Todd, no, you'd like to be cross-exed? Are you okay? Could you argue for justice, or did you argue for justice? Non-negative what? No. Do you remember what they said? So you can put yourself in that mindset of arguing for justice on the negative side, assuming military personnel. Well, I have several questions here, but not necessarily directly to justice. I actually just became my allergies have been working out this last week. It's terrible.
I have something.
Okay, you can. We'll let everybody help you, but it's okay. The questions that I'm asking, once again, one of the things I learned in my brief time in law school is you never ask a question you don't know the answer to. pretty much. If you have to get information in cross-section, you can get something to ask. But generally, you'll want to ask questions you know the answer to. And if they don't answer them that way, it'll be obvious that they're trying to avoid answering. Okay, are you ready? Thank you for your wonderful speech. I agree with so much of what you had to say. I think justice is a wonderful thing we should seek for. However, I do have some questions for you about that and war in general. But would you agree that combat is a tool used in war? Yes. And then would you also agree that combat and war are not the same thing?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, they can't say it's a tool used in combat and then say they're the same thing, which they probably wouldn't want to. They can't do that. That's logically not possible. So that's the way you want to ask things. So they can't, if you ask the first question, second question, they can't answer and be logically consistent. And that's in any case. It's always the case of when you're developing a cross-X. Am I right to assume, I'm hoping I typed this all right because I haven't memorized or looked at that much. Am I right that you assume our side is on the morally right and just side of the war in which this combat is taking place?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with the statement, there is a difference between what is legal and what is just?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that with our legal system, that justice must include the consideration of mens rea, which is the state of mind, or the accused or the guilty mind of the accused? Would you agree with our legal system that justice must include consideration of the mens rea, the state of mind?
Yes, I would.
For example, the difference between someone who intentionally murders someone and someone who accidentally kills someone in a car accident, is there a difference?
Yes.
Okay, so you would agree. Do individuals on the opposite sides in combat typically know personally those whom they are trying to kill?
No.
If our side represents a just and moral cause in the war, would you agree it follows that the greater good and justice will be done if our side wins?
Repeat the question, please.
If our side represents just and moral cause in the war, which you said it did, would you agree it follows that the greater good and justice will be accomplished if our side wins?
Yes.
Okay. If our side is just, the enemy soldier, whom we know nothing about, is fighting for the side that represents injustice and moral inferiority. Can you explain, this is an open-ended question, but can you explain how our military personnel, even if they fight legally, can possibly be expected to deliver justice in the midst of chaos and the danger of battle, while at the same time attempting to kill and bring violence on people about whom they know nothing of their individual mindsets? Do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. If our side is just, and the enemy soldier, whom we know nothing about, is fighting for the side that represents injustice and is morally inferior, can you explain how our military personnel, even if they fight legally, can possibly be expected to deliver justice in the midst of chaos and the danger of battle, while at the same time attempting to kill and bring violence on people about whom they know nothing of their individual mindsets? Can you explain that?
Nope.
Okay, there is no, as far as I can tell, there is no explanation. Anybody want to help answer that question?
I don't think you could throw that kind of question on someone without them. They need more time.
They do. There's no way
And
they're
it's
going
like
to
the
answer.
longest question ever.
Yeah.
I'm
I'd be
pretty sure
doing,
not even the judge could.
I know.
exactly. So
I'll be like,
they can't answer it. There's no way they can answer that. You're going to come back to that and rebut. So, and the judge cannot answer it, but they get the idea. I think you got the idea though, right?
Yeah.
Because I led you with the questions that I asked. You led to that question. It is something they cannot answer. And the thing is, I'm not gonna leave this, sometimes you might want to leave it for rebuttal, but in this case, I'm not gonna leave it for rebuttal because they'll just ignore it. I'm not gonna allow them to ignore this question, and that is the question for justice, if they're using military personnel to me. How do you expect that, what does that really look like is the question, okay? Now, they could answer.
You could rephrase it and say, what does that really look like?
What?
You could rephrase it to
You could
what
say,
does
you
it-
could, any of these things, when I write things, I tend to write them, and then I think, okay, what if they say that, and I tend to make it much more complicated. You can simplify the questions, and put them in your, anything you do here, you want to put in your words that's natural for you to say, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Or you can read it like it is, because if you read it a couple times, and you can put explanatory notes in there as you read the question, that's okay. But now, they could answer, I provide justice by killing them because I'm fighting for justice, or they might try to say something about killing, not killing mothers or babies, but that's not, that still does not answer the question.
So could they, if they were to encounter a question like that, would they be able to tell the person that's, giving
If
the
who was to
question,
answer,
can you simplify that? Can they say that?
they could say, I don't understand. I say, well, what part don't you understand the
Can
whole
you
concept
rephrase
you've
the
answered each
question?
Or
of
can you
them.
rephrase the
I've
question?
asked
say-
that. I've asked it before.
Yeah, you can
Okay,
rephrase the
that's
question.
So
perfectly fine.
that's fine,
As long as you
okay.
get in a respectful
Because
manner,
maybe
you're
they get
good.
tripped up on their own question.
Yeah,
You know?
a person who can't answer will often ask that. So that's a tactic to use. Then the question is, yes, can you explain briefly how military personnel bring justice by killing others? That's the simplified, then you have the caveats, because they may try to answer that. You can simplify, you can come up with a simpler thing. And you can, if they do ask you to rephrase it, you can make it really blunt. You can even make it, leave out all the qualifying things which I put in
But
there.
I can already see how they're just gonna be, even with your first, the question about do we represent like the morally right side, they're gonna be like, well, that depends on what we're using.
Well, if what we're using,
Well, they're not gonna say yes or no, they're gonna say.
they're better,
some
because
sort
they
of
say no,
extent.
then how do you intend to bring justice if you're not representing
Well,
justice?
then, I'm sure they just say, well, that's the point of this
Yeah,
debate,
they
we're
would make
trying
it
to,
up,
we're
yeah.
trying to make ourselves the morally
No,
right
I'm not
side.
talking about how we conduct, okay, this is good, this is what you want to, so I'm not talking about how we conduct ourselves, I'm talking about our side when we went to war, which is what I asked, when we went to war. Here's, by the way, you can have this first page, affirmative C. I'm getting ready to go to rebuttal too from this. But think about how you might try to not answer the question, or you might try to, and then you want to come up with a, see, last year I spent a lot more time on this, and I said, okay, if they say no, then I go here. Because you can trace this down, if you want to take the time, you can trace each of these, I'm not gonna hand it out to you, but you can trace each of these down. If they say yes, which is the expected answer, or they can say no. So, see, here's the question. They say no, we don't represent that which is morally justified. Then you say, well, how do you expect to bring your value is justice. How do you expect to bring justice at all if no matter whichever side of this debate you use, if you aren't representing that which is just? That would be my question, probably off the top of my head. To me, there is no way you could answer the opposite way, and now you could answer the opposite way, but then it leads you into a real problem. Most people, I think, are going to answer, yeah, of course our side is right or just. And you could, once again, it says here, am I right to assume, not prove, but assume. You can go, once again, you're right, that's a question that, if they see where it's going, they may or may not see where it's going.
So ask it all out of order.
Exactly. All these questions, if you notice, I asked them all out of order. I didn't ask them directly. If I can come up with a number of questions, I'm going to throw them, I'm not gonna let them see the logic of where I'm going. I'm not gonna
That's
see how.
deceitful.
Very deceitful. If you really, well, I do this in normal conversation. If I'm having a discussion with someone, I'm trying to with an argument, or I will never ask direct, because there's a thing in psychology, when people know where you're trying to take them, they're going to resist you. So you have to take them, guide them around the mental roadblocks, and the way you do that is you don't let them see where they're going, where you're going with it. So I'll ask a question up here to which I know they're gonna answer, and I'm waiting to get down to here later by asking a couple other seemingly non-related questions. Then I tie them together. And then it seems like they'll think we're talking about one thing, and I'm actually talking about something totally different. And that's what you wanna do. You wanna come to the surprise ending where they have now answered they've already answered all the parts of the question that seem unrelated, and you're tying them together. So if you can tie them together and then go back and say, okay, how do I get these are the threads I'm tying together. How do I want them to answer each of these threads before we get to the final question where they don't have any wiggle room, because they've already answered them all. But I don't want them to tie them together before me, which really, really smart people might do that. But it very seldom happens that people will tie random questions together in time. Now, they might do it, but in time to be ready to deal with it. And if you do find something like that, you're probably gonna lose anyway, quite honestly. So that's just part of, they're better than I am. So, but